Hey guys, so the Vatican's been doing a investigation, a research, looking into history, church history, to see the possibility, if there's a possibility of having women deacons in the Catholic Church. They're giving the Pope this report, is due next month, December, and then Pope Leo just ordered all the cardinals of the church to come to the Vatican for a meeting in January. So a lot of speculation is this is the reason to discuss the possibility of women deacons in the Catholic Church. So just let me be clear what this means and what it doesn't mean, because, you got a lot of grifters and gaslighters. Negativity and hate towards the Catholic Church is very popular on YouTube. So let me just give you the facts. In 2013, Pope Francis excommunicated his first priest. It was Father Greg Reynolds, and he excommunicated him for advocating ordaining women. Advocating. And when asked about this, Pope Francis, several occasions, secular news outlets have asked Pope Francis, will the church ever ordain women? And he explicitly says no. First time I heard him say it, he said no. Jesus chose 12 men to be his apostles. No pope can change that. This is Pope Francis. Then in June 1st, 2021, Pope Francis updated canon law 1379 to say if a bishop ordains a woman, they're both excommunicated. And I'll read the exact text from canon 1379. It's real short. Both the one who tries to confer a sacred order on a woman and the woman who tries to receive it incurs a penalty of excommunication. So a sacred order would be bishop, priest, or deacon. So what they're researching about women deacons is not ordaining women. So don't let these gaslighters get you full of anxiety that the church is becoming liberal, because the church is trying to going back into tradition. Just like Vatican II went back to tradition of the first 3, 4, 5, 6 centuries, and many people at that time thought they were going modern because it was different than what they did in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, and they got all upset. And then you had liberal theologians that lied about what was said in Vatican II and what was taught in Vatican II, and they taught priests, so priests were putting all this, Fruit Loop stuff into their liturgy, and everybody blamed Vatican II, when now we know it wasn't Vatican II, it was these liberal lying theologians. Same thing's happening here. So in 1965, do you know there were no men deacons? 0 permanent deacons in the Catholic Church. It just kind of faded away. Vatican II wanting to go back into tradition, to the early church, realized permanent deacons were an important part. I mean, just think about St. Stephen. He was a deacon. Francis of Assisi was a deacon. Today, there's over 50,000 permanent deacons in the Catholic Church. And I actually heard one of these traditional Catholics, they call themselves traditionalists. I call myself traditional because traditionalists worship tradition. Traditional Catholics worship Jesus Christ and obey his church. That's tradition. Catholics obey the church. Basic Catholicism. But I heard like a traditional Catholic like saying, why do we even have permanent deacons? Like they were bashing permanent deacons. Now I've never heard like this was just a layman, a YouTuber, the YouTube magisterium we have. I've never heard a priest or bishop say that. I believe all the traditional masses have, from what I understand, they have permanent deacons. But some traditionalists, because we didn't have them in 1960, think it's modern. But the Bible is clear. We've had them from the very first. But what about women deacons? We see one reference in Romans. This is the oldest Catholic document right here. This was written in the 1st century, Romans 16:1-2. This is St. Paul speaking to the church in Rome. I commend you, our sister Phoebe, a deaconess of the church, a centuria, that you may receive her in the Lord as befits the saints, and help her in whatever she may require from you. For she has been a helper of many, and of myself as well. The Greek word for deacon used in that verse is diakonos, diakonos, diakonos. And it's the same word used in Philippians when it talks about deacons, and in 1 Timothy when Paul talks about deacons. So in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 13, Paul said deacons, and again, it's the same exact word he used for Phoebe, diakonos, diakonos, I think is how you pronounce it. Deacons, likewise, must be serious, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for gain. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested first. Then if they prove themselves blameless, let them serve as deacons. Okay, deacons likewise must be serious, not double-minded, not addicted to much wine, not greedy. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested. 11. The women likewise must be serious, no slanders, but temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be the husband of one wife. And we hold to that tradition today. My son is 27. In my diocese, he can't be a deacon until he's 30. But he's researching this, and he knows if he becomes a deacon, he's married right now with 3 children. They plan on having more. But if his wife dies, he can never remarry, because we are Bible-believing Christians. I can't tell you how many Baptist and Pentecostal churches the deacons were remarried deacons, So, but anyway. So then you say, see, deacons got to be man because they're married to one wife. Yeah, this is what we're researching. But Phoebe was a deaconess. So what's up with that? This is why the church is researching it. But let me go on. Let deacons be the husband of one wife, and let them manage their children and their households well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves, and also a great confidence in the faith, which is Jesus Christ. So let deacons be the husband of one wife. But before that, it says, the women likewise must be serious, no slanders. Bible scholars and theologians, both Catholic and Protestant, will tell you Paul could be referring to women deacons or to the wives of the husbands. They don't know for sure. This is why we do research. And when we did research for the ordinary Mass, what is properly known as the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass, the theologians went back and they found archaeological evidence. They found ancient documents from the church. St. Justin Martyr's description of the Mass in 155 AD is almost identical to the new Mass. They found from like 300 AD how they conducted the liturgy, and they took from that. This is how we came up with the new Mass. We went deep into history, stuff we didn't have in the 1600s, So when things left the liturgy, we didn't know it was even in there. But the church did research, and this is how we came up with the new Mass, which brought back permanent deacons, and which brought so many evangelicals like me back into the church. In 1965, there were 650 million Catholics worldwide. Today is 1.4 billion. The church more than doubled after Vatican II. Priests before Vatican II, by every account, like one was done by the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. In 1965, most priests, I think it was like 70% of the priests said they were progressive and liberal in both their theology and politics. That same university asked the same questions of priests in 2022, and less than 2% said they were progressive. It was like 98% were conservative politically and conservative theologically. So this is the fruit of Vatican II. This is why Satan hates Vatican II, is always attacking Vatican II. There's others, but I'm not going to keep going on. But where else in history do we see women deacon? So here's a list of some we have throughout history. Olympius in Constantinople, ordained by Bishop Nectaris, friend of Gregory of Nazianzus, and later of St. John Chrysostom, whom she greatly helped during his conflict with the emperor in exile. She died in 418 AD. And Nema, about whom we know that she ministered in Antioch during the persecution of Julian the Apostate in 361 AD. Pentadea, a deaconess to whom St. John Chrysostom wrote letters. So we have letters from St. John Chrysostom to this deaconess, Pentadea. Salvina, whom St. Jerome knew and who later became a deaconess in Constantinople. The deaconess Anastasia, whom Servius, Bishop of Antioch, mentions in his letters. The deaconess Macarena, sister of St. Basil the Great, and her friend deaconess Lampadilla. The deaconess Theosebia, wife of St. Gregory of Nyssa. And then we have at least 28 other women on tombstones. Sophia Jerusalem, 4th century, Theodora of Gaul. It goes on and on. So we've had deaconesses. That's in the Bible. It's in church history. It's in tradition. So what the church is exploring, and Pope Francis explicitly updated canon law that we can't ordain women to sacred orders, but they're exploring how were these deaconesses servants. They were obvious servants. St. Paul said she was a very helpful St. Phoebe, Deaconess Phoebe in the Bible. So how do we implement it now? Is it something that God wants the church to have? And how would it work out in reality, practicality, if they're not ordained? They would be helpers. They would assist. They would assist women in baptism. The Bible says the older women should teach the younger women how to stay home and raise families. They could assist women in that way, just like deacons talk to men about being men. All the deacons I know are on fire, married men, on fire for the Lord. They love the church, and they're good fathers and good husbands. So they can minister to us men. The deaconesses can minister to the women. They can assist in baptism. They can assist in catechesis to women. I mean, this is what the church is exploring. The church may say, no, this is something that God wanted early on in the church, but we don't need it now. We have enough men. I don't know. Whatever the church decides, they decide. I'm a son of the church, and I will assent to the church. But I'm going to warn you, just like under Pope Francis, I can't tell you how many people left the church because they got so involved in these guys day in and day after, convincing them. Some outright saying Pope Francis was a heretic, some just leading people to believe that. Taylor Marshall did a survey, and one year he asked, how many of you think Pope Francis is actually the valid Pope? And 51% of them didn't think. So more than half of his followers are sedevacantists. This is like a great heresy. They're not Catholic. And then like a year later, he asked the same question. It was up to like 70%. And many other, he's the biggest. So you had a lot of copycats. They seen how he grew from like a small channel over 1 million. So you had a lot of copycats. And all he did was just people. So I can't tell you how many Catholics emailed me and said they were so lost. They stopped going to church. They were considering, becoming Orthodox or just not even being a Christian. So many. And they were just so full of anxiety and tension. And then they realized they were being lied to and came back to the church and focused on what the church teaches, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as they were evangelizing their family, bringing their families into the church that had left, bringing co-workers in the church, they seen their old friends still being gaslit, watching all these YouTube dissenters, and they were miserable, doing nothing for the church, just complaining day in and day out how liberal and modernist the church came. And, Pope Pius X warned about this. And when I showed several of these people his letter about the modernists, they were amazed and convicted and realized they were the modernists, because what Pope Pius X called the modernists, you can read it in his letter to his popes called Love the Pope, were those who dissent from the Pope, those who demanded the Pope to explain to them, to their liking, why he was doing what he was doing or saying what he was saying. Basically, what all these Catholic dissenters on YouTube are doing. So don't let them gaslight you. Don't let them get you angry. God is love. And if you're a Christian, you're going to be filled with the love of God. If you feel hate and anger towards Pope Leo or to your bishop or your priest or any bishop or priest, it's not from God. The devil is attacking you spiritually. And I believe it was St. Paul said, the devil comes as an angel of light. Don't be surprised if his servants come as righteous men. Don't be surprised if your favorite YouTube that comes in a suit and tie and, prays in Latin and talks all theological and, is a servant of Satan. If he's attacking the church, if he's dissenting from the Pope, if he's leading you to hate the church, he's a servant of Satan. So anyway, I'll keep you posted on any decisions the church makes. But just know, we're Catholics because Jesus Christ started the Catholic Church. And he said the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. So the church is not going to teach heresy. God bless and stay Catholic.